into the life of singer Linda Ronstadt, who has sold millions of records. She's performed over 4 decades and made history.
Linda Ronstadt is finally saying what she never did before. The voice behind some of the most timeless songs in music history is now opening up. Not about her success, but about the people who made her journey harder. For decades, she stayed quiet, choosing grace over gossip. But now, she's naming 7 musicians she quietly resented throughout her career. Some of the names might surprise you. And the reasons? They're personal, emotional, and in some cases, deeply painful. Let's discuss it all in the video. Growing up surrounded by sound. Linda Maria Ronstadt was born on July 15, 1946, in Tucson, Arizona. She was the third of 4 children in a close-knit family that was deeply connected to music. Her father, Gilbert Ronstadt, ran a machinery company called F. Ronstadt Company, but his true love was music. Her mother, Ruth Mary Copeman Ronstadt, stayed home to raise the children and kept the house filled with warmth and creativity. Music was part of their daily life. Her family sang Mexican folk songs, old ballads, and popular American tunes together. These songs were emotional anchors, filled with history and meaning. Linda learned to understand emotions through melodies before she could fully explain them in words. From a young age, she was surrounded by different musical styles. There were mariachi songs at home, country and western tunes on the radio, and traditional American standards playing in the background. Her father introduced her to the greats of the American songbook, artists like Frank Sinatra and Ella Fitzgerald. Meanwhile, her mother played the light-hearted operettas of Gilbert and Sullivan, which added a touch of theater and wit to Linda's musical education. By the age of 10, she had already absorbed a mix of opera, folk, gospel, rhythm and blues, and rock and roll. Her ears were wide open. Every style she encountered left a mark on her. When she turned 14, Linda started singing in a small folk group with her brother Peter and her sister Gretchen. The group didn't make headlines, but it gave her confidence. Performing with her siblings helped her see how music could be a way of expressing who she really was. Their small performances introduced her to harmonies, live audiences, and the vulnerability that came with being on stage. This early experience planted a seed. She wanted more. She didn't just want to sing other people's songs, she wanted to find her place in the music world. Over time, Linda became one of the most respected singers of her generation. She moved between genres with ease and became known for the deep emotion in her voice. But behind the scenes, not everything was easy. The industry could be harsh. People didn't always treat her with the respect she earned. She stayed silent for years, choosing not to start fights or drag anyone through the mud. But recently, she admitted there were 7 musicians she never forgave. These were people who dismissed her, tried to control her sound, or made her feel less than. Some talked over her in meetings. Others told her she didn't look like a star. One insisted she wasn't strong enough to headline a tour. Another tried to take credit for her arrangements. She didn't name them to settle old scores. She did it to show how even the most successful women in music were constantly questioned, undermined, or pushed aside. For Linda, it was never just about ego. It was about how easily some people in the industry ignored the work, the preparation, and the emotion that went into every performance she gave. Early performances with her siblings. Before Linda Ronstadt became one of the most recognizable voices in music, she started small. With her siblings, she formed a group that went by different names over time. They were sometimes called the Union City Ramblers, and other times, the 3 Ronstadts. These early performances took place in local places like coffee houses and university halls, where the audience was close enough to hear every raw note. Their set lists came from the music that had always been part of their lives: folk, bluegrass, country, and Mexican ballads. In a small Tucson studio, They recorded a few tracks under the name The New Union Ramblers. The recordings were simple and unpolished, but they captured what made Linda unique, her ability to mix tradition with personal expression. Even as she sang with her siblings, Linda started to feel pulled in a different direction. She imagined blending the softness of folk with the energy of rock and roll. That idea stuck with her. So after spending only one semester at the University of Arizona, she made a decision that would change everything. At just 18, she packed up and moved to Los Angeles. She was chasing a sound that hadn't been fully formed yet. Los Angeles, with its growing music scene, offered her the space to find that sound. As she worked to develop her voice, Linda turned to the singers she admired. She often spoke about the emotional power of Lola Beltran and Edith Piaf. Their performances taught her that emotion was as important as technique. She also learned from Hank Williams, whose simple lyrics held surprising depth. But Linda didn't limit herself to one style. She also listened to opera singers like Maria Callas, studying how they used breath and control to shape every note. Growing up, American radio in the 50s and 60s introduced her to a wide range of sounds. That mix of influences became the foundation of her musical identity. Linda Ronstadt never stayed in one genre. She didn't want to be labeled as just a rock singer or just a country artist. She was all of those things and more, switching between styles with a voice that could adapt easily. Her albums showed that range, moving from one sound to the next without losing authenticity. She once said she felt more connected to the songs that didn't make it to the charts. These lesser-known tracks gave her freedom to express herself without pressure. Even though she didn't write many of her own songs, only co-writing 3 in her entire career, she had a strong ability to choose songs that felt true to her voice. Every time she sang, it sounded like she had lived the story in the lyrics. Her vocal ability was both wide and deep. She could move from a warm contralto to a bright soprano within the same song. This vocal flexibility, combined with her emotional delivery, made her stand out in any genre. Her talent broke records. Linda became the first woman in pop music history to achieve 4 consecutive platinum albums. Over time, she collected 14 albums that each sold over 1 million copies. Her voice educated them. She helped introduce older music, like songs from the 1920s and 1930s, to new listeners. These songs had almost faded from memory, but her interpretations brought them back with new life. Holding on to her identity, as she became more successful, she started exploring all the different parts of her identity through music. Singing mariachi felt like coming home, and when she performed the Great American Songbook, it reminded her of childhood. She always tried to stay connected to the emotional truth in her songs, even as the music industry pushed her toward bigger stages and more rock-heavy records. In the 1970s, she helped shape the sound of country rock, a genre that was just beginning to find its place. She worked closely with artists like Emmylou Harris, Graham Parsons, Neil Young, and the Eagles. Together, they helped country rock gain mainstream respect. They showed it could be just as deep and powerful as anything else on the charts. But as her popularity grew, so did the pressure to perform more rock and roll. That pressure sometimes weighed on her. Instead of giving in completely, she kept exploring other styles. She believed that staying in one place creatively would make her lose interest. So she kept moving, kept experimenting, and kept growing. By the early 1980s, Linda Ronstadt was one of the most successful female artists in the world. She had made millions through album sales, concerts, and merchandise, and her net worth was estimated to be over $40 million. Through all the success, she stayed true to her vision. Her music always came from her heart. In early 1970 Los Angeles, something big was beginning to take shape. A group of young musicians were starting to find each other, and Linda Ronstadt was right in the middle of it. 2 of those musicians, Don Henley and Glenn Frey, were both still figuring out their paths when they joined Linda's touring band in 1971. Henley had been sending his own songs to Linda's producer, John Boylan. While the songs weren't quite the right fit for Linda's style, Boylan saw potential in Henley's drumming. Linda first noticed his rhythm during a performance at the Troubadour. It had a special blend of country and rock, and she felt it would work perfectly in her band. At the same time, Linda needed a guitarist. Bernie Leadon, her first choice, was already busy with the Flying Burrito Brothers, so Glenn Frey stepped in. He had been part of a duo with J.D. Souther, who happened to be Linda's partner at the time. As Frey and Souther were splitting up musically, the timing worked. Frey joined the tour. Their early rehearsals didn't happen in some fancy studio. They took place in the living room of the house Linda shared with J.D. Souther. It had enough space, and more importantly, it had the right energy. That living room, filled with furniture pushed to the side, became their first unofficial rehearsal space. One afternoon, Linda walked in while they were rehearsing Witchy Woman. The harmonies were perfectly locked, and the energy in the room was electric. She didn't interrupt. She just listened and realized something powerful was taking shape. Even then, it was obvious they weren't just a band. They were a movement. With a tight budget, band members often shared hotel rooms. Frey and Henley ended up rooming together. During those nights on the road, they started to realize they had something rare. Both could sing, both could write, and both had dreams bigger than being backup musicians. Frey later described Henley as his secret weapon, someone with talent and vision. Everyone around them sensed what was coming next. Their time with Linda gave them the space to grow. It wasn't just another job. It was the beginning of what would soon become the Eagles, one of the most successful rock bands in American history. Linda may not have been part of the band, but she helped launch it in a real way. Her tour gave Henley and Frey the chance to meet, work together, and start dreaming of something more. From harmony to headlines. The Eagles didn't take long to rise. By the mid-1970s, they were more than just successful. They were everywhere. Their sound, a blend of California country and smooth rock, reached beyond one genre. Songs like Take It Easy and Desperado filled car radios and jukeboxes across America. They won Grammys, sold millions of albums, and became stadium headliners. Hotel California became some of the best-selling albums in U.S. history. Their music spoke to a generation that wanted something deeper than party anthems. Their lyrics had weight, and their melodies stuck. But with all that success came pressure, and cracks started to show. Henley, once the thoughtful and grounded drummer in Linda Ronstadt's touring band, began to change. The fame affected him. He was no longer the guy hoping someone would notice his demo tapes. He had become a rock icon, and it showed. Friends and colleagues began to notice the shift in him. Things came to a head in 1975 backstage at the Universal Amphitheater. Henley made a remark about Linda's music that hit too close to home. He implied she should stick to singing songs written by others, reducing her artistry to that of a cover singer. Linda didn't argue. She simply had him removed from the tour. It was her way of saying that certain lines shouldn't be crossed. The fallout didn't stop there. Henley continued to make digs about her, saying she wasn't strong enough to handle real success. It was personal. Linda had given him a platform when he was still finding his way. Now, he acted like she never mattered. Their friendship ended not with a public feud, but with silence. From that moment on, there was a wall between them. Still, Linda never denied the role those early years played in music history. That band, those rehearsals, those late nights on tour, the songwriting sessions, they were part of something important. Without her, there might not have been an Eagles. That fact remained, even if the friendships didn't. During the late 1960s, Los Angeles was a creative storm. Young musicians were everywhere, trying to make a name for themselves. and Linda Ronstadt was one of them. She had just started gaining attention with the Stone Ponies, and her gentle yet powerful voice was drawing people in. Jim Morrison, already a rising star with the Doors, was part of that same scene. While their styles couldn't have been more different, they met through mutual friends and often ended up at the same places: the Sunset Strip, the Whiskey A Go-Go, or the Troubadour. These were not glamorous encounters. Everyone was still figuring things out, trying new sounds and chasing record deals. Their meetings were casual. There were no big collaborations or explosive moments, just two young artists crossing paths in a music scene that was still raw and open. Morrison was already known for pushing boundaries, while Linda was building a reputation for crossing genres without losing her identity. They both belonged to a generation that didn't want to be boxed in, and while nothing long-term came out of their connection, the energy of that moment stayed with them. Clashing with Neil Young. By the 1970s, Linda Ronstadt's career had started to grow steadily. She had a few albums out, and critics respected her. But when she teamed up with Neil Young, it was clear she was entering a much bigger space. Neil was already known for being difficult to pin down. He didn't follow rules, and he didn't compromise his sound for anyone. Their connection began with music. Linda sang backup vocals on Neil's hit Heart of Gold, and in 1974 they went on tour together. It was a huge deal for her. Most of her shows had been in small venues, the kind that fit her emotional style. Now she was on a stadium tour, trying to find her place in a louder, rougher environment. But the partnership soon turned into a challenge. Neil Young had strong opinions about music, and even stronger opinions about what didn't belong. As the tour progressed, it became clear that their styles and visions were not blending. Linda's approach leaned toward polished, melodic arrangements, while Neil was all about raw emotion and protest energy. Things came to a head in 1976 during a concert organized to support farm workers. The event was supposed to show unity and purpose, but when Linda offered suggestions for the set list, Neil shot them down. He told her there was no place for pop or commercial music at a protest. He dismissed her. After the show, Linda quietly left the venue in tears. To the crowd, it was just another night. But for her, it was a moment of rejection she didn't forget. Then came the comments. Neil told reporters that Linda's voice didn't suit protest songs. It wasn't said harshly, but it felt like an insult. To Linda, who came from a family that deeply valued activism and social justice, it was personal. She felt like he had stripped away not just her music, but her values. After that, she refused to work with him again. Even as years passed and opportunities came, she said no. Neil, however, continued to bring her up in interviews, sometimes calling her talented, sometimes saying she didn't belong in certain spaces. But his words didn't carry warmth. They only reminded her of the rift. Their stories are never fully untangled. The tour, the rejection, the headlines, they became part of Linda's story whether she wanted them or not. And for Neil, the tension was just another chapter in his long, messy history with fellow artists. For Linda Ronstadt, Neil Young slowly became the kind of person who talked about justice and ideals, but forgot to show kindness along the way. Their creative partnership ended, but what stayed with her was disappointment. She never saw him the same again. The admiration turned to silence, and that silence carried a kind of sadness that didn't fade with time. Linda Ronstadt and David Crosby started out in the same chaotic, buzzing world of late 1960s Los Angeles. They were fresh out of high school, still figuring things out, chasing whatever small break they could find. At the time, British bands were flooding the charts, and the US music scene was unsure of its place. But LA had its own rhythm, led by singer-songwriters who wrote from the gut. Linda and David were part of that wave. They played in the same clubs, especially the Troubadour, where unknowns hoped the right person might be sitting in the crowd. They found themselves surrounded by familiar faces, Joni Mitchell, Mama Cass, and others who would soon become icons. Linda had a voice that sounded effortless, but could break hearts. Crosby had a talent for harmony that helped define the sound of Crosby, Stills, and Nash. Neither of them played it safe. They said what they thought. They didn't care much about rules, and fame didn't soften that edge. Both of them were more at home in the studio than on the road. Touring never really excited them. The real connection happened with the music, not the crowds. But fame brought pressure, and even in rooms full of people, both of them sometimes felt completely alone. Linda especially faced moments where she was let down by the people she once trusted. David Crosby eventually joined that list. Their bond in the early 70s was real, but his addiction and ego made it hard to keep any sense of balance. Things finally broke in 1978. They were working on a harmony track, but Crosby wouldn't let her shift the pitch to fit her voice. He told her to adjust herself, and that started a loud argument in front of the entire crew. The press picked up the story, and Crosby's follow-up interviews made it worse. He suggested that Linda only sounded good because of studio tricks. That was enough for her. She cut him off completely after that. His name didn't come up in her conversations anymore. To her, he became a reminder of how fame, addiction, and pride could ruin something that once had promise. Some artists just aren't meant to work together. On paper, Linda Ronstadt and Paul Simon should have created something memorable. But the studio doesn't care about paper. In 1982, they decided to try a duet for Simon's upcoming album, one that was still in its early stages and carried the working title Tao. From the very start, Linda felt like something was off. Paul Simon had a reputation for being exact and very particular, and that version of him showed up immediately. During rehearsals, he stopped her constantly, making notes and corrections she hadn't asked for. He pointed out the way she sang certain words, critiqued her tone, even suggested lyric changes she didn't agree with. It didn't feel like a partnership. It felt more like being tested in a classroom. Her confidence started to slip, and the room began to feel smaller. The session went on longer than it should have, and in the end, no song came out of it. Nothing from those days in the studio ever saw the light of day. Simon never mentioned the failed attempt in interviews. He kept quiet. But for Linda, it became something she carried with her. It wasn't just about one recording. It was about respect. At that moment, she didn't feel like an equal, and she promised herself she'd never go through something like that again. Not all confrontations happen in the studio. Some come out of nowhere without warning. In 1979, Linda performed at a Cleveland music festival. Elvis Costello was also on the lineup. At the time, Costello was the face of a new kind of sound. He didn't care for the old rock styles, and he made that clear. Without even speaking to her, Costello made her the target of a press joke. He described her music as something you'd hear during brunch, soft and forgettable. Linda heard about the comment and was stunned. She tried to confront him backstage, but Costello, clearly drunk and not interested in conversation, insulted her again before walking away. Linda Ronstadt's story is about what she had to endure behind the scenes. From creative clashes to moments of pure disrespect, these experiences shaped her far more than most fans ever knew. Which of these stories shocked you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments.